crowd was following Jesus along the shore of the lake. It was not a crowd of curious onlookers. It was a crowd of people who had tried everything and still had not found rest. Some had come from far away. Some carried burdens they could not even put into words. There were mothers with sick children. There were men who had lost everything they had built. There were women living with shame over things no one else knew about, yet they carried those secrets like a stone pressing against their chest. They did not come because life was going well. They came because life had become difficult, and someone had told them that this man from Nazareth spoke differently, not like the teachers of the law who piled rules upon the backs of people already bent under heavy loads. He spoke with authority, they said. But it was not the authority of someone who crushes others. It was the authority of someone who knows, someone who has walked through the wilderness, someone who understands hunger, exhaustion, and the weight of a night that seems as though it will never end. And Jesus saw that crowd. He did not pass by them. He did not divide them into groups of greater or lesser importance. He stopped, looked at them, and began to speak. What came from his mouth in that moment was not a set of religious instructions. It was a description of the world as it truly is, and of the kingdom as it truly works. A way of thinking so completely opposite to what the world teaches that most of the people who heard him remained silent for a long time afterward. Those words have never grown old. They still reach people today with the same power they carried on that day by the lakeshore, because the human heart has not changed. The pain has changed its name, its context, and its address. But what hurts inside a person today is made of the same substance as what hurt inside the people who sat on the grass looking at him. And it is to that heart, to that burden, to that weariness, that the words of Jesus are still spoken. Before Jesus told people what they should do, he described who the kingdom welcomes. And the list is surprising. It does not begin with the strong, the disciplined, or those who have already resolved their inner struggles. It begins with the poor in spirit, with those who mourn, with the meek, with those who hunger and thirst for something the world cannot sell. He looked at that wounded crowd and said, in essence, "You are exactly the kind of people the kingdom embraces." This is important to understand because there is a version of Christian teaching that operates like a list of prerequisites. You must be doing well before you can come near. You must solve your problems before you deserve attention. You must appear balanced, have the right answers, and speak the right language. That version is not the version of Jesus. The version of Jesus begins with mourning, with inner poverty, with persecution. It begins with the very conditions the world labels as disadvantages. There is a woman who hides within herself because she learned early in life that showing vulnerability is dangerous. There is a man who does everything right on the outside but cannot sleep at night because he feels that something essential is missing and he does not know what it is. There is a person who has lost faith in themselves after so many failed attempts. Jesus looks at each one of them and says, "Blessed," not as a cheap form of comfort, but as a declaration of their place in the kingdom. What Jesus is teaching here is not that suffering is good in itself. He is teaching that suffering does not disqualify you, that inner brokenness is not a barrier to the kingdom, that simply recognizing your need is the beginning of something, not the end. And that changes everything. Because if you have believed that you must be whole before you can be accepted, the words of Jesus come as a direct correction to that belief. You do not need to be whole. You simply need to be here.
There is a seed that seems to have no value at all. It is too small to impress anyone. If you showed it to someone who did not know what it was, they would probably throw it away. It has no striking color, no fragrance, no shape that hints at what it will eventually become. Jesus took that seed and said, "The kingdom of God is like this. You plant something that appears to be nothing, and what emerges is greater than anything you could have imagined while holding that seed in the palm of your hand." But before he spoke about the seed, Jesus told another story. A farmer went out to sow. Not every kind of soil received the seed in the same way. Some fell on the path, and the birds ate it before it could take root. Some fell on shallow ground filled with rocks, and it sprang up too quickly because it had no depth. When the sun beat down, it withered away. Some fell among thorns. It grew, but it was choked before it could bear fruit. And some fell on good soil. That soil produced 30, 60, even 100 times what had been planted. Jesus did not tell this story to place people into fixed categories. He told it so that you would look within yourself and ask, what is the condition of my soil right now? Because the same soil can change. The rocks can be removed. The thorns can be cut away. The hardened path can be plowed. The current condition of your heart is not a permanent sentence. It is a description of where you are, not where you will remain forever. And that distinction is essential for anyone listening who feels that something good once tried to grow within them, but was eventually suffocated. What most often chokes growth is not visible sin, it is worry. Jesus was remarkably specific about this. The thorns that choke the seed are the anxieties of life and the deceitfulness of riches. They are the everyday concerns that seem too urgent to ignore. A person does not deliberately walk away. They are simply consumed little by everything that feels more immediate, and the seed that had been planted is slowly deprived of life, not because of rebellion, because of the weight they are carrying.
Then Jesus said something about the human heart that is difficult to hear, yet necessary. He said that the mouth speaks from the abundance of the heart, that a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit, that every tree is recognized by the fruit it produces. The image seems simple, but it reaches deep, because it shifts the focus away from outward behavior and places it on the root. It is possible to spend years trying to change the fruit without ever touching the root, trying to control what comes out of your mouth without examining what lives within you, trying to appear different without asking what is feeding the very things that continue to surface. Jesus is not condemning anyone with this image. He is pointing to where the real work must happen, not on the surface, at the root. And roots do not change through sheer willpower alone. They change when they are nourished by something different from what has been feeding them all along. There are people carrying a story within themselves that was planted by someone else. Someone told them they were not enough, and those words grew inside them like a bitter root. Someone abandoned them, and that abandonment created the belief that they are not worthy of being stayed with. Someone betrayed them, and that betrayal formed a layer of protection that over time became confused with coldness, distance, and an inability to trust. All of these things are roots, and this is exactly what Jesus is talking about. The good news within this teaching is that roots can be replaced. The heart is not a fixed and unchangeable structure. What was planted in pain can be uprooted, and something different can be cultivated in its place. This does not happen overnight. It is not instantaneous, but it is possible. And the first step toward that possibility is precisely what Jesus calls for throughout his teaching: recognizing what is there before pretending that it is not. Now Jesus arrived at one of the most difficult points in everything he taught. Not the most theologically complex, but the most emotionally challenging. He said, "Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you." This instruction was not given to be analyzed from a distance. It was given to be felt up close. And when it is felt up close, it hurts before it sets you free. Because there is always a specific face behind this command. Not an abstract enemy, but a real person. Someone who did something real. Someone whose name you can think of right now without any effort. And Jesus does not minimize what that person did. He does not say it was insignificant. He does not tell you to pretend it never happened. He says that the path forward runs through love, not retaliation. Not through forced forgetting, but through a deliberate choice not to let what was done to you determine what you will do to someone else. There is an invisible prison built by resentment. It does not appear in any medical diagnosis, yet it produces very real symptoms. Sleepless nights, endless rumination, the same scene replaying over and over in your mind. The imaginary conversations you have with that person at 2 in the morning. The energy spent rehearsing what you would say if you ever had the chance. All of this is resentment occupying space that could be used for something else. Jesus did not ask you to set the offender free. He asked you to set yourself free. Then he added something that completely overturns ordinary logic. He said, "If you love only those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even those with no spiritual foundation do the same." The distinguishing mark of the kingdom is not loving what is easy to love, it is loving what is difficult. Not because the difficult person deserves it, but because love practiced under those conditions transforms the one who chooses it. That is what Jesus is teaching, not an unattainable ideal, but a practical path toward inner freedom.
Jesus then spoke about judgment, and what he said completely overturns the natural human tendency to measure others before measuring ourselves. He deliberately used an absurd image, a person trying to remove a speck from their brother's eye while an entire beam remains lodged in their own. The image is almost comical, designed to be memorable, but what it carries is not humor, it is diagnosis. The tendency to see another person's flaws clearly before recognizing our own condition is one of the most common forms of human blindness, and it is not limited to people with bad intentions. It often appears in those who genuinely believe they are helping, correcting, or simply being honest. But the honesty Jesus calls for begins within, not as self-punishment, but as clarity, as the first step for anyone who truly wants to see. This has a direct application for those who are suffering. One of the most common ways pain continues to thrive is through narratives in which the other person is entirely responsible and I am entirely the victim. Sometimes that narrative is largely true. Sometimes there is a real offender and a real victim. But even then, the question Jesus asks remains, what is in your own eye? Not to minimize what was done to you, but to ensure that you do not continue walking through life with a beam that prevents the kind of vision necessary for rebuilding. The instruction that follows carries the same pattern of reversal. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. Here, Jesus presents a logic of persistence rather than merit. He does not say that you will receive because you are good enough. He says that you will receive because you asked, because you sought, because you kept knocking even when the door seemed closed. The qualification for receiving is not inner perfection, it is movement in the right direction.
Jesus once said,
that we should not store up treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Instead, he told us to store up treasures in heaven. Then he said something that many people pass over quickly because it seems like a simple continuation of his teaching about material wealth. He said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This is one of the most accurate observations Jesus ever made about the inner workings of the human heart. The heart follows investment, not the other way around. This reverses the way most people think about motivation. Most assume that first you feel something and then you act. But Jesus suggests that the process can also work in reverse. Wherever you place your attention, your time, your energy, and your care, your heart gradually moves in that direction. Affection is shaped by practice. You can choose where to invest, and your heart will follow. This has direct implications for those who are suffering and feel unable to experience anything positive anymore, for those whose faith has grown cold, for those whose hope feels exhausted. Jesus does not say, force yourself to feel. He says, in effect, move your investment. Begin directing your attention to what matters, even if you do not feel anything yet. The feeling often follows the practice. The heart moves toward the place where the treasure is being deposited. This is not positive thinking. It is an observation about the way the human heart functions. Then, Jesus speaks about anxiety with a depth that goes far beyond simple advice. He does not merely say, "Do not worry," as though worry were something easily dismissed. He builds an argument. He points to the birds. He points to the flowers, not as examples of neglecting practical responsibilities, but as examples of creatures that live within an order that sustains them without needing to support their own existence through the force of anxiety. His argument is this: you are worth more than they are. If they are cared for, what does that say about what is available to you?
There were two men who built houses. Neither of them knew for certain that a storm was coming, but one of them dug deep before he began to build. He kept digging until he reached solid rock. Only then did he lay the foundation. The other started at the surface. He built more quickly. His house was finished sooner. From the outside, the two houses may have looked exactly the same. The problem was not in what could be seen, it was in what lay beneath. The rain fell on both houses. The flood came against both. The wind struck both with the same intensity. Jesus did not say that the house built on the rock remained untouched. He said that it did not fall. There is an important difference between those two things. A solid foundation does not prevent the impact. It sustains you through the impact. The storm still comes. The waters still rise. The wind still presses against the walls. But the structure endures because there is something underneath it that does not give way. This story is not really about construction. It is about what happens when life applies real pressure, real loss, a real diagnosis, real abandonment, real financial collapse, a real crisis. Jesus never promised the absence of pressure. He promised that the outcome would be different depending on what was beneath the surface. And what lay beneath the house that endured was the practice of his words, not merely intellectual knowledge of them, practice, hearing and doing exactly as he said. This matters because there is a difference between knowing the teachings of Jesus and living within them, between knowing what he said about anxiety and actually practicing the trust he described.
between knowing what he said about forgiveness and genuinely beginning the process of releasing what you have been carrying. A foundation is not built through information alone. It is built through repeated movement in the direction of what has been taught. And that takes time. But every step of obedience adds another layer of rock beneath your feet.
Jesus said something about prayer that completely changes the way it can be understood. He told the story of a man who went to a friend's house at midnight to borrow bread because a traveler had arrived unexpectedly and he had nothing to offer him. The friend was asleep. The door was locked. The children were already in bed. The timing was inconvenient. From inside the house, the friend replied, "Do not bother me now." But the man outside kept knocking. And Jesus said that even if the friend would not get up because of their friendship, he would get up because of the man's persistence, because of his refusal to leave empty-handed. Then Jesus connected this directly to the relationship with the Father. Ask, seek, knock. In the original Greek, these verbs are in the present imperative, indicating continuous action. Do not ask only once, keep asking. Do not seek only once, keep seeking. Do not knock only once, keep knocking. This reveals something important about how Jesus understood prayer, not as a form to be filled out correctly in order to gain approval, but as an ongoing conversation that continues even when the answer is not immediate, as a practice of repeatedly directing the heart toward the one who has what you need. Persistent prayer is not an attempt to persuade God to change his mind. It is a practice that changes the one who prays while waiting for what has been requested. Then Jesus added a comparison that speaks to something deeply practical. He said, "Which father, if his son asks for a fish, will give him a snake instead? Or if he asks for an egg, will give him a scorpion? If human beings, with all their limitations and imperfections, know how to give good gifts to their children, how much more will the Father give the Holy Spirit to those who ask him?" The logic moves from the lesser to the greater. If the imperfect is capable of this, then the perfect is capable of far more. This comparison was designed to reach the heart of anyone who grew up believing that God is arbitrary, unpredictable, or distant. Jesus is describing a father.
There was a son who took his inheritance before the proper time, traveled to a distant country, and spent everything on a way of life that did not last. When the money ran out, famine followed, and he found himself feeding pigs and longing to eat what the animals were eating. It was at rock bottom that he came to his senses. And the first thing he did when he came to his senses was remember his father's house, not as a place of punishment, but as a place of provision. Even my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, he thought, and here I am starving to death. He decided to return. He prepared a speech. He planned to offer himself as a hired servant because he believed he no longer deserved to be called a son. But before he could finish that speech, his father saw him from a distance, and the text says that the father ran. He did not wait for his son to reach the door. He did not stand on the porch with folded arms waiting for an explanation. He ran. He embraced him. He kissed him. And when the son began the speech he had rehearsed, the father interrupted him and called for the best robe, the ring, the sandals, and the fattened calf. Jesus told this story to describe how the Father receives those who return, not with hesitation, not with a probationary period, not with a lecture that must be endured before restoration can begin, with a celebration, with a father running toward his child, with the very best being placed immediately upon someone who arrived with nothing. This is not a dismissal of the seriousness of what was done. It is a description of a love that is greater than the record of failure. But the story does not end with the celebration. There is an older brother standing outside, angry, carrying a list of legitimate complaints. He stayed, he worked, he never disobeyed, and yet he never received a feast. So the Father went out to him as well, with the same willingness to include him, with the same message: everything I have is already yours, and this celebration does not diminish what belongs to you. Jesus leaves the story unresolved for the older brother. The door to the celebration remained open, but we are never told whether he entered. That unfinished ending is not a narrative oversight. It is a mirror placed before everyone listening.
Jesus was preparing his disciples for something they did not want to hear. He told them that he was going away, that there would be pain, that they would weep while the world rejoiced. Then he used an image that completely transforms the meaning of suffering. He said that a woman in labor experiences anguish because her time has come. But when the child is born, she no longer remembers the pain because of the joy that a human being has come into the world. This is not a minimization of pain. It is a recontextualization of pain. There is a profound difference between suffering that leads to nowhere and suffering that precedes a birth. The biological reality of childbirth is a model Jesus chose deliberately. The most intense pain often comes immediately before the arrival, not before nothing, before something. And that something has a name, a face, a weight, and a life of its own. The pain of labor is not random. It serves a purpose that gives it meaning in retrospect. There are seasons in human life that follow this same pattern, times when everything seems to be falling apart, when what is actually happening is a transition. A former way of living is coming to an end so that another may begin. And in the middle of it, it feels like collapse, not birth. But Jesus says, your sorrow will turn into joy. Not perhaps, not maybe. He says it with the same authority with which he spoke everything else. Then he adds the statement that summarizes it all. In this world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. This is not a promise of protection from hardship. It is a declaration that hardship does not have the final word, that the system which produces suffering has already been confronted by someone who passed completely through it and emerged on the other side. When Jesus says, I have overcome the world, he is not speaking of an abstract victory confined to some distant theological realm. He is speaking of something with direct consequences for those who are listening right now. The victory of Jesus does not remain contained within itself. It extends to those who are united with him.
There was a night when the disciples were in a boat, and Jesus was not with them. A storm had risen in the middle of the lake. Waves crashed against the hull. Water poured in. And sometime during the night, they saw someone coming toward the boat, walking on the water. They were terrified. They thought it was a ghost. Then Jesus said, "It is I. Do not be afraid." This scene is a picture of what Jesus does with circumstances that seem impossible. He does not always remove them before you reach them. He enters them. He walks through them. He comes to where you are by passing directly through the very thing that has been terrifying you. And the first thing he offers is not an explanation. It is an identification. It is I. Before any instruction, before any correction, before any theological explanation, he reveals who is present. Then he says, "Do not be afraid." Everything Jesus taught in this collection of words can be understood as an extended version of "do not be afraid." Every teaching about anxiety is an extended version of "do not be afraid." Every teaching about the Father who feeds the birds and clothes the flowers is an extended version of "It is I, do not be afraid." Throughout all his teaching, Jesus was constructing a portrait of who is present and what his presence means in the face of fear. And those words are still moving. They were not left behind in the first century. They are not relics of another age.
They arrive now with the same structure, the same logic, and the same power to enter whatever is heavy and say, "It is I." The seed that seemed too small to matter is still being planted. The tree no one expected is still growing. The son who returned from far away is still being welcomed with a running embrace and a celebration. And the woman in labor has not yet reached the moment when she will forget her anguish because of the joy that follows. But that moment is coming, and Jesus already knows the name of what is about to be born.